Good day everyone and welcome to this build video for a Magicka Frost Warden for the Firesong DLC. Ironic, isn't it? Warden, well, Magicka Warden specifically, is a class that has been bad, actually, for PvP for a long time. But in this patch, maybe the previous patch already a little bit, but especially this patch, it has become strong, actually. One of the strongest classes out there, if not the strongest, alongside with Stamina Warden and Nightblades of any kind. So it's quite surprising to see that even though this class has been weak for so long, it doesn't have to stay this way. And thus here we are with a Magicka Warden that I've been playing because it is strong, it is fun to play, it's a unique playstyle based around Frost, and I think people will enjoy this. I enjoyed it a lot as well playing it, and that's why I wanted to put a build video out there for it as well. So firstly, a quick note about the build itself while I'm at the stats screen here. It is a build that is based on a lot of pressure over time, both in terms of AoE and in terms of single targets. And I will go through how did I do this. But in combination with that, I also have burst, because the Warden can have a lot of burst. And the healing is great too, simply because the Warden has a really good healing toolkit. I have unbuffed about 30k health. Once that the Warden passive procs, I think it's called Maturation, it will be higher, around 31k or so. 40 points into Magicka, 24 into health. I'm a Breton, high health will be good too, and Dark Elf would be good too. The sustains are alright, the magic recovery is maybe a little bit on the low end. You cannot spam skills forever, but it's okay because you can do a heavy attack with the Ice Staff, very reliable every now and then, to get your sustain quite right. For the spell damage, 3.6k unbuffed, spell critical and critical damage is low, but this is not a crit build, even though I do think you can build a Warden for that as well. For now I do like to go with this pure ice damage over time and burst kind of route. So I will be pushing my spell damage with this build, as well as some proc sets on top of that to get my damage out. I'm a Vampire Stage 3, this is a must-have for PvP always. The Mundus is the Apprentice, and I'm using Orzoga Smoked Bear Haunch as a food. Then for the sets, I have on the two bars as weapons, two arena weapons. On the back bar I have the Maelstrom's Perfected Ice Staff, in combination with Crushing Wall, of course. This will increase the damage from Crushing Wall, and it's a nice bit of a ground AoE dot that will deal a bunch of damage because of this set here. And the Magicka Warden is a pretty tanky brawl kind of class, and often I'm fighting in a tight space with people around me all the time, be it in Battlegrounds or in Citadel, and people will be standing into that ice wall for a lot of time, so you are getting a lot of value out of it, because on top of providing some damage, it also provides crowd control by rooting enemies. Then on top of that, it's an infused frost damage glyph on this staff, and this, when I'm on the back bar or on the front bar, is going to proc constantly because of the elemental wall, and like that is a lot of extra pressure, and it's a lot of frost damage, and that's very important. I will get to that in just a moment. On the front bar then, I have the Master's Ice Staff. Ideally you have Perfected, of course, but that just happens to be the one master weapon that I don't have, and honestly I cannot be bothered getting it for just 100 spell damage. So if you have the Perfected staff, that's ideal, but a normal Master's Ice Staff will do as well. This is just for reducing, well, mainly for the 600 weapon and spell damage after casting Destructive Touch. I will go over that a bit more when I'm at the skills as well. But this is a big spell damage increase that will be up permanently, basically. Then for the trait here, it is charged with a shock damage glyph. And here I arrive at the actual, like, bit of a point of this build as well. Of course, you're going to have a lot of pressure simply due to your skills and the procs that we'll go over in a bit as well. But the chilled stats effect for Magicka Warden got buffed quite significantly. For a Warden, this is now going to deal an increased amount of damage. So having a lot of chill stats effect procs is really nice for your sustained pressure to the enemies. And that is something that this build will have. Many of the skills are ice-based, and of course with the frost damage glyph constantly proccing the elemental wall, and then your spam will also being frost damage, you will proc chilled a lot because of the charged trait. And having a lot of chilled procs guarantees a lot of pressure over time. It will proc multiple times a second. It doesn't have any sort of cooldown like that of 1 per second. No, it just procs every second. And that's quite a bit of damage over time like that. On top of that, on this Ice Staff, I have a shock damage glyph. I don't need two frost damage glyphs, they share a cooldown, so that wouldn't be good. but the shock damage glyph I have here will proc minor vulnerability, and that also increases the damage that the enemy takes, so that's nice to have here. And then to complement that, I wanted to choose a 5-piece set, and I've gone with the Ice Furnace for this. Ice Furnace is a set that I've actually used way back in the day for Magicka Warden as well. I quite enjoyed this set as well because it really goes in neatly with this Frost theme to add some fire on top of that. And this is going to be a constant source of pressure as well. On top of all the chill procs, you will have this AoE flame damage proc that does not hit very hard every second, but it does proc every second again and again and again. And that way it can provide a lot of pressure, especially if you're also fighting some kind of brawling AoE kind of setup. That in combination with your elemental wall is a nice bit of AoE pressure and then some burst from your shulks on top of that. There are other options though. Instead of Ice Furnace, you could also go for the Twice-Flanked Serpent, for example, to get a lot of penetration, or for Frostbite. That's another popular set for Magicka Wardens nowadays. It's decent for PvP too, so you can't really go wrong with this, especially because this is a strong class. You can kind of play around with what you want. And then lastly, if you feel too squishy, which shouldn't be the case because this class has a lot of survivability, you can also go with Rallying Cry. It's not optimal to double bar it, but even then it is still a good set that gives you a lot of critical resistance and some spell damage on top of that as well. And then to finish this build off, I have the mythic here, the Sea Serpent's Coil. This is a really nice mythic for Warden because it is not a class that relies on kiting very much. It is tanky by itself, good at holding its own ground, especially if you have elemental wall in that too. You kind of have an area that you control, and being snared in that is quite alright. But even if you want to move, Warden also has a really good mobility skill, Birds of Prey, and if your Sea Serpent's Coil is up or down, this thing will help you get out of a tricky situation, get into some other west like that. So the drawback of this set you don't really feel, and then the benefit of the set being the Major Berserk and Major Courage is really strong, and it's a big boost to your damage that I do recommend trying out. But if for some reason you don't want to, you can always go with the Mark and Ring of Majesty as well. And then for the final set, I have the 2 separate monster set pieces for a 1-piece Stamina and Magic Recovery. That's Baron Tursk and Magma Incarnate. That way I get to sustain up to what I would like it to be without having to sacrifice anything in terms of Mundus or Spell Damage Glyph or anything. Plus monster sets are not that valuable right now, so I do like this combo here that just fixes all my sustain up. You can also go for Balork if you want to go for big bursts with Northern Storm or with Thornbreaker, but I do like to, at least for 1vx, just get my sustain really solid. If you're in group, then Balork is probably a better option though. And then for the final 2 pieces, I have a 2-piece trainee, just giving me some extra health and magicka. This is simply useful to have to get your stats good, to get about 30k health and about 25k maximum magicka. Helps with the sustain and the damage this way. Then for the trait on the gear, I have a full impenetrable except for the cuirass, which should be reinforced. I have 3 heavy, 3 medium and 1 light. And then on the jewelry, I have 3 infused spell damage enchants, and this together with all the buffs like Major Sorcery and Sea Serpent's Coil will get your buffed spell damage to around 6.2k, depends a bit on passives here and there and quality of the gear and such things. So that's a nice amount of spell damage to have on top of a proc set and a lot of chilled procs, so that way you have a lot of pressure. And then, for defense you have your healing toolkit, and I'll go over that right now. I'll start with the back bar. So this class has a lot of healing options available. I'm using as a burst heal here Arctic Blast, a really good burst heal that also stuns enemies. And this is super nice if you're in a tricky situation, because this really takes off a lot of pressure if you're able to stun everybody like that. To just give you a showcase maybe a bit of how strong this is as well, there's a monster set which is called Zol the Ever Wakeful, which has this similar kind of effect of breaking free and then stunning an enemy, or giving some extra breathing room to yourself. And it's an alright set. It's not super good, but it's an alright set. But the Warden just gets this entire thing built in with its heals, so that's a super nice thing to have. Then on top of that I have heals over time, so Leeching Vines here, and then Resolving Vigor. I'm a bit on the fence here between Leeching Vines and Living Trellis. If I would use Living Trellis as a spawnable, maybe then I would prefer that, but I already have Arctic Blast, so I do prefer the extra healing over time from Leeching Vines. And then Resolving Vigor is really good heal over time, every class should run this, and it also gives you Mind Resolve. Then Blue Betty for the Magicka sustain, Blockade of Frost, or you can also go for the Explosive Wall instead. I'm not too sure which is best here. I've just gone with this for now. It's pretty good, but if you move around more and you want to go into the next area, or if you want to spam this a bit more for its benefits, then it is better to go with Explosive Barrier. And then Ice Fortress, your armor buff, and then on the back bar I have Northern Storm as an ultimate. This, when you have enough ultimate, is a really good pressure ultimate as well. Even though the tooltip is not too high, on top of all the other AoE pressure you do, it's super good to have. It also gives you some extra spell damage and major protection, so if you want to go into an enemy group, this is a really good cost ahead of time, and then combine that with a Shulk's explosion right when you enter the group. So yeah, Shulk, or Deep Fissure, is what I have, of course, as a burst ability. This also gives me a lot of penetration. On the front bar, I also have Ice Reach as spammable. This deals just a bit less damage than a normal spell spammable, but is still really good because I will proc Chilled with this every time, and I will also proc the Master Staff with this every time. And it has a little dot that is not really noticeable, but it's nice to have all that with a drawback of just dealing a little bit less damage with your spammable. You can also run, if you want to, Crushing Shock instead of Frost Reach, and then you can, instead of the Master Staff, run the Asylum Staff. That will also proc Chilled all the time, plus your other status effect, so that's another option for your spammable. And then as the mobility skill here, I have Bird of Prey, really good immobilization and major expedition for 4 and 6 seconds respectively, and minor berserk on top of that, further increasing your damage. Then as a flex spot here on the front bar, I have Crystallized Slab. You have different options here. I like Crystallized Slab because it will stun ranged enemies. It can also proc multiple bolts back at the enemy at once. The tooltip is not that bad actually, especially if multiple ones hit. It also stuns them, and if you want to suddenly surprise a ranged enemy like a Nightblade or a Sorcerer, like one of those Sniper Nightblades for example, you can cast a Sub-Assault, then cast Crystallized Slab and really catch them off guard as they are casting Snipe by just basically one-shotting them with this. It also protects you quite nicely. The other morph of this, the one that gives you major heroism, is pretty good as well, but that's a purely defensive use as well, worth considering nonetheless. And then yet another option, if you really want to go for the full Frost roleplay, you can also go for Winter's Revenge over here, which is going to give you another ground AoE Frost dot on top of your elemental wall, so then you really can claim an area for yourself in the fight, which is nice to have. And any other skill that you want can also fit here. If you want to use Frozen Gate for some reason, you can also do that. In any case, on the front bar I have Dawnbreaker of Smiting. This is a nice quick burst ult, it goes beautifully with Deep Fissure, and it's also rather cheap, so that's a staple that many classes use in PvP, and I also use this for my Warden. Then for the champion points, in the blue tree I have Mustard Arms, Biting Aura, Wrathful Strikes, and Focused Mending. Wrathful Strikes is a flex spot. You can also change it out to anything else you want, like Fighting Finesse, or not a defensive healing CP like Cleanse and Revival. And then on the red tree, I have Sustained by Suffering, Pain's Refuge, Survival Instincts, and Celerity. Celerity counteracts your Snare from Serpent's Coil a little bit. This is nice to have, and if you want to counter it further, you can always go for more swift traits on the jewelry as well. But personally, I don't need it. I'm very happy with just having 3 infused on the jewelry traits, because I don't feel like Warden needs that much mobility, especially with the good mobility skill it already has. But anyway, that's it for this build. I hope you'll find it useful if you decide to try it again. There's some gameplay I will list in this video as well in the background or afterwards or something like that. If you want to have more builds like this, consider subscribing or liking the video. In any case, I thank you for all the support. Shout out to my Patreon members for supporting the channel, even in this rather difficult time of the game. You're a big reason why I keep on putting out videos as well. So thank you for that. And I will see you guys next time. Bye.